mean, I got a message that my voice is low. You can hear me,
No,
right?
no.
Correct?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right, guys. So today we are going to talk about the pre-sales in RPA, what exactly pre-sales is, and on estimation, right? How do we, do the correct estimation for our RPA processes? How do we determine the complexity of these RPA processes? So let me go ahead and, explain first what pre-sales is, right? So pre-sales is so for some of you it may be a new word, or something that you have not heard much, or maybe you are aware about it but you don't know what exactly happens in the pre-sales activities. So pre-sales process is a set of activities that are carried out before the customer has been acquired. I mean, these are some of the activities that we do before we go ahead and submit these proposals to our clients, and it's also supporting the sales team in the process of acquiring a new customer. So in pre-sales usually we listen to word like RFP. So let me tell you what RFP is. RFP is nothing but it stands for request for proposals. It is basically a formal document that a organization uses when they want to buy a service or a product, and then lot of other vendors they submit this RFP to different vendors, and then these lot of different vendors, they go ahead and respond to this RFP. So these vendors, they go ahead with their own proposals, that we have capabilities to work on this service that you want, and we can help you deliver the outcome for these services. So basically it's like in simple terms, if I want to explain, you must have heard for something like tender. A tender is passed, and then lot of people go ahead and bid for the tender, and then whoever has the best quality, best work, and the best price, that person wins. So it is exactly the same way it is carried out for RPA projects as well. RFP is circulated for two different vendors, and then every vendor comes up with their own proposals. So basically, these proposals, they contain three major things in that, and they are technical, administrative, and financial. And when I say technical, it consists of the business objectives of the project, and the details of the project. The scope, the in scope, the out of scope. The outcomes that will be the part of the solution, the deliverables. Some of the assumptions and dependencies that are made when putting up the solution. And so these are from the technical aspect of it, and some of them are from the administrative aspect, like it includes having the information about the company history, the organization, and how at what other places the company is running, the different headquarters it has, the different location it is situated, and the operations which they are doing. So basically the different projects, and also the RPA project history, if they have done similar projects in RPA for some other company. So those all things need to be part of this proposal. And at the end we have the financial category, wherein we outline the information about the business plan, the financial data. Basically it consists of the team structure that will be part of this proposal, the team that will be supporting this particular activity, which is like a team could consist of a business analyst, RPA developers, RPA solution architect, RPA QA. So all these things, and a budget is decided for it, and basis that all these things fall into the financial category. So all these things, once the RFPs circulated, all these different vendors, they put in these information majorly on these three different categories, and then they go ahead and submit the RFP to the organization. So that's the basic nitty-gritty of creating the proposals, creating the response for this RFP. It's so again, going in and explaining in simple terms, it's just for example, if you go to if you for example, if you've liked some goods, or if you want to buy something, so you go to, let's say if you want to buy some product from Amazon, so you will go ahead and check for the different products that are available on Amazon, right? And you will buy it. So in terms in technology services, right? So it's not something built and readily available. So every organization has the different requirements, different needs, different business problems, right? So they go ahead and create a formal document about their requirements. This is what they are looking for, this is the business processes they are looking to automate, this is the different department in which they are looking to automate RPA. So every vendor, once they receive this RFP, they respond to them in in these three different categories, creating the proposal document for it and then submitting to the organization. So that's the basic, the gist of the RFP and the pre-sales role basically. So every RPA business analyst, at some or the other point of time, will also have to work with the sales department, and identifying and creating these proposals. If there's more and more work coming up, so every company, they start having more and more pre-sales people in their team, so they can create these proposals for them. So that's the major role of a pre-sales consultant, responding to these RFPs, creating these proposals, and submitting these RFPs to those organizations. So, if I go more in detail, what exactly happens, or, in a typical RPA pre-sales activities, is we try to do is, uh, can you guys hear me well? Niklesh, can you confirm? Niklesh or Vibor? Okay, because I am getting a call from Niklesh. Just a sec. Share my screen again. Yeah. So, being specific on the RPA pre-sales, it's about knowing what can be done within that scope of RPA, because there have been times, where there have been multiple challenges with which, we have decided that this is going to be in scope of RPA. And then, we try to identify what would be the best workarounds or solutions, to have the in scope for RPA done correctly. So the first thing, when we go ahead and submit the proposals, we make sure that whatever is there in the scope, we try to get and deliver the best solution for that. And some of the things, these things are majorly on the solution perspective, right? So whenever we create these RFPs, right, we have a lot of different sections. It is like, we, as I was explaining you in my previous slide, right, we have three divided into three categories. So all these three categories will have different sections, right? Like, first we will have our understanding of the business, process, and then we will have the summary, then we will have the solution overview, the requirement, and then the solution overview. Then we'll have some technical team that will be required to do this work, then some of the assumptions and dependencies that we are making, when we are doing the solution, and then the financial aspect, that is, how much will be the total investment that will be required to put this solution live. So similarly, when we do that solutioning part, right, so we try to advise our clients to do some process re-engineering. So when I say process re-engineering, right, it means making the process standardized for automation, right, like creating or making some things which are not very readily available, or they are automation friendly. So we always try to make sure that all our processes which we are trying to automate are standardized, and all of them are re-engineered if possible. For example, if we have to go to from A to C, and we have B in between, but if we can directly skip B and directly go to C, so that could be possible. And if that could be possible, then our first try would be to do some process re-engineering on those things, and then do automation on top of it, because then the automation will reap more benefits compared to taking the process as is and then automating it. And yeah, then we look at the workarounds, like as I mentioned, that if we can directly go to C from A, then we will try to have that workaround implemented before we go ahead and implement that solution. And we also advise our clients to go for a pilot process or a POC. So by POC I mean it's nothing but a proof of concept, wherein so lot of people, lot of clients, since they are new to RPA, so they get questions like, how successful RPA will be, and what would be the challenges that can arise. So we advise our clients to not directly go for the whole full-fledged implementation, but what they can do is to understand the benefits what RPA can bring to the table. So we can first go with some pilot process or a POC. So POC is nothing but a proof of concept, right, which gives you an example, or which gives you some proof that this concept will work for your organization. We try to automate some part of the process and show it to them that see, this is how it would be automated. So the client gets that surety and that confidence, right, that it could be automated. And so usually we recommend that to the clients, or a pilot process. So when I say a pilot process, it means that we go ahead and try to automate the process end to end, and we also put it on production. So we say it as a pilot because it's the first process that will be developed and that will go live. So with that, clients again get that surety and confidence that we are on the right track, and I think, and they think that we can go ahead and start automating the next few processes as well. So that's the ideal approach, when we suggest these RPA concept to any new client. So this was something on the pre-sales angle to it. It's so pre-sales and a business analysis role go hand in hand. So you also have to do some organizations have this, that you also have to work on the pre-sales activities, and and also do the business analysis role. So I'll just take a quick pause here, and you guys can drop in your questions, which we will be taking at the last 5 minutes of this session today. And you can drop in your questions, and I'll take them at the end, and we can discuss around those questions. So this was about the pre-sales, and I'll jump into the next session for today that I had was on the estimation part, right? So I'm sure you guys have went through the initial process assessment session on day 2, right, in which you must have heard about how do we go ahead and discover the processes for automation, how do we check whether that process is actually feasible for automation or not. how do we determine whether, that process is a good fit for automation or not? So basically, once you have identified that, the process is feasible, it's good to go for RPA, it's the right candidate for RPA, then we go ahead and do the complexity assessment. So, the first step is definitely the feasibility assessment. And then, once you're sure that the process is feasible, then you go ahead and do the complexity assessment for that process. So, once the process is feasible, so we determine the complexity of the process, and the complexity of the process is determined, as low, medium, or high. And yeah, and once we have the feasibility, the complexity study done, then only we can arrive at the correct estimates for the process. So what do we mean by estimation? So, as I'm sure by complexity you understand, it's just defining how complex that process will be, whether it's gonna be low in complexity, medium in complexity, or high in complexity. That means it is the complexity level, and it determines how much difficult it will be to automate that particular solution. So let's say if it is low in complexity, it means it is very easy to automate that process. If it is medium in complexity, it means, it is average process, which will have some medium challenges, and it will be a medium challenge to automate that process. And if we say high, so it means it's very high in complexity, it's very complex to automate. So these all things determine your estimation, and estimation means the number of time, the number of hours which will be taken, to develop that automation solution for the client. So, let's say if I say, if we come to the conclusion that the process is low in complexity, so it means that, it will take, let's say, 3 weeks of development time to develop that process. And if we say the process is medium in complexity, so it will take 5 weeks to 6 weeks, to, develop that process. So basically our complexity will determine our estimation. Our complexity will help in determining the right estimation that will be required to develop that particular solution. So complexity assessment is basically, the process of assessing the candidate process based on various parameters, which I'll be discussing in the template that I have. So, there are various parameters, basis which we determine the complexity of the process. And then this complexity assessment, it provides the estimates for our development and standardization efforts that will help us, giving the estimation that, this is the time that will be required for development, this is the time that should be required for standardization. So by standardization, again, as I mentioned in my previous slide as well, that we always try to re-engineer the process, or standardize the process, before we go ahead and automate it. So we also need to consider those standardization efforts, before we go ahead and automate the process. So let me quickly share this template with you, the complexity template, which will give you the understanding, how do we, on what parameters, we determine the complexity. So let's say, I'm going for a process of, let's say, procure to pay. Okay, so in this process, we will have to go check for these multiple parameters. Let's say how much is the manual hours that it takes, to, currently run this process. So let's say, so this all information, right? This all information we need to gather from the process SME. By SME, I mean the subject matter expert, who has the in-depth knowledge of this process, and who's currently working on this process. So that person will be able to give us the right information on this process. So we'll check for the manual hours, right? We ask the question to that SM, how many hours, are you spending per month, maybe on a daily basis, to work on this process. So let's say there is one employee, who's working on this process 2 hours per day. And let's consider, he's working 20 days every month. So there are 22 working days in a month, and let's say, 2 days official leave that we get. So let's consider, 20 days of every month, so we multiply that, and then we select our answer from this. So we have a list of options here, and then basis the monthly hours that the process SME spends on this process, basis that we select this. So let's say in our case, our SME is spending around 2 hours every day. So it's around 40 hours in a month. So let's say we select 11 to 40 as our input here. And then we go to the next parameter, which says the personal quantity, which means the number of people that are working in this process. uh, it could be 1 to 2, 3 to 8, or maybe 9 plus. So let's say in this particular process there are 4 people who are working. So we will select the option as 3 to 8. And then we'll go to the next parameter, which says the departments. So department is nothing but the different teams, departments, or the groups that are the stakeholders in the process. So by stakeholders I mean who are involved in this process, who have their inputs in this process. So let's say we get the response from the SMEs. There are 4 departments which are actively engaged in this process. Let's say they are IT, finance, database, and process improvement. So we go ahead and select 4 here, maybe like 3 to 4 in the option. We can select this one. And then we check for the technology landscape. So by technology landscape, I mean how many different types of applications or technologies are involved. So let's say the business user says that there are more than 4 technologies or 4 applications involved in this particular process. Like there is Excel, and there is there is their website that they work on, the cloud application, and the email application that they work on to send emails to their other business end customers, right? So this determines the number of applications that they are using. So let's say in our case they are using 4 applications, so I'll just go ahead and select 4 from this drop down, 3 to 4. And let's say now that we have identified that there are 4 applications, right? So in the information silos, right, we determine under these 4 applications how many different sub applications or different pages that they go and visit. So let's say if it's an Excel, then how many sheets in that workbook they go ahead and access. Let's say if it's a website or a cloud application, then we check how many different pages in that website that they go. First they go to login, then they go to the customer profile, then they go to report section, then they extract the report from that customer section. So all these things, all these different pages that they access, we need to put that into consideration. And then the different other applications, like let's say they are accessing PDF. So how many pages in the PDF they do access? And if it's an email, then is there a dedicated inbox for them? Or if not, then if it's a dedicated inbox, then we just add 1 to the score, or if not, then we add 10, because it's gonna be going to somebody else email, and then accessing that particular email. And then for different applications we have different scores. And let's say for the 4 applications that we have decided, right, in the technology landscape, let's say there are 4 applications that are part of this process. So Excel will have 4 sheets, and then PDF we need to access 5 pages from the PDF. Then from the website, then we need to go ahead and access 3 different pages and 1 pop-up which we need to handle. And then there is a dedicated email. So adding all these we get 14. And so your score for this particular parameter would be 14. So from the drop down you can select the option as 6 to 20, as 14 falls between this. right? So that's your input for information silos. Then you go to process steps, and you determine how many different process steps are actually involved, to do that process from start to end. So let's say if there are 133 process in inputs, so yeah, so let's say if there are 133 process inputs, so you select that particular value here to make sure that you arrive to the right complexity. And then you have the data size, that's the number of records or rows that you need to process. So, it depends, how many number of records are part of your file, or an Excel file, or maybe a different application from where you will be extracting these records and putting it into a different application. So, these different files will have different size. Ideally it's best to, divide these large files into smaller subsets, so we can have faster processing of these boards. So, it again depends, how many different records that you have to process from these files. So let's say we have around 500 or 450 records which we need to process every day, right? So we'll select this option from the drop down. And then, we have something called as business logic, which directly determines how much complicated the logics are involved in the process, whether there's a human judgment required, or it's something very straightforward, like adding a 1 plus 2, something logics like this are required. So basis that, we determine whether the complex, whether it's a very low complex business logic, or whether it's a medium business complex logic, or whether there are undefined scenarios which may arise in the process, which means that you have to deal with some judgmental calls, that whether this particular payment needs to be approved or not, which requires a thorough understanding and the previous work experience on the process, which is a very highly complex thing to do to automate. So that will fall under the high complexity. So basis, once you're done with the feasibility, once you understand the process, once you know the different business rules and logics that are required, to automate that process, then you define, you know, how simple, how low, medium, or complex, the business logics are in the process. So, let's say if, it's just a very simple thing, with the simple if else conditions which we can satisfy, then it will definitely be low business logic complex. But then, if there are complex conditions which are part of the process, then it will be a medium or high business logic process. And, as I mentioned, if there are undefined scenarios, or something that requires human judgment and things like that, so that will be definitely a high business logic. So let's say in our case, it's a medium business logic, which it needs to handle. And then we have another parameter for deployment. And so in deployment, we determine how complex will be the rollout means, pushing the code to the production, the live environment. And we also make sure to ask, are we going to use the same environment, the QA environment, to develop the automation, or the QA environment or the prod environment will be different. So so one basic thing, or a ground rule for RPA automation is, we should always have the prod environment similar to the QA environment or the dev environment that we use for our development and testing. The reason being that is, the RPA works on the presentation layer. It works on the UI, everything that we code, it's completely based on the UI, right? We select the selectors and we record the screen. So everything is majorly happening on the UI front, right? So if we say, if if the client says that you're gonna have completely two different environments, different for QA, different for our prod environment. So that is going to be a challenge, because prod environment may have different challenges in itself, and they may have their own UI changes. So, the deployment will be really high in such cases, because, the UI may be different. So, at times there would be times that, you will have to recode certain things for the prod environment, because you have done all the development on the QA environment. And then once you deploy your code to the prod, then you realize that, this is not the way it was in QA. So that's one of the ground rules. And then we check, uh, is there a restricted access to these development machines, and how these machines are accessed on the prod environment. Does the IT push system application updates to all computers, or can a specific computer be exempted, because if a bot is running on that particular machine. So we have to consider all such parameters before we go ahead and deploy our code to the production environment. So basis this, you determine, how much complex our deployment would be. So let's say again in our case, it's going to be a medium complex, right? And then on the last parameter that, we decide is on the standardization, as I mentioned that, it will be in some range, and, we need to determine that, these are the efforts that we require to standardize this process before we go ahead and automated, the process re-engineering that would be required to actually go ahead and make the process standardized first, and then putting the RPA bots on top of it. So the questions would be around how long it will take to define and standardize these processes for automation. So if we have the files which are automation friendly, then definitely we will have low standardization efforts. But then if we have very complex logic or process steps which are undefined, then definitely we will spend a lot of time and standardizing those process first. And let's say if there are regulations that govern the process, let's say in case of healthcare processes, right? So there are HIPAA regulations that which needs to be governed, or which needs to be taken care before we go ahead and automate those processes. So those kind of efforts we need to consider, and we need to determine in which bucket it will fall into. And let's say if it's a banking process or a corporate banking, or let's say it's a finance process, and we need to do some payment posting on it. So what banks are associated with it, are we can the bot directly go and access the bank websites, are there captcha or captcha fields which needs to be encountered, or maybe MFA. So all these factors we need to determine, and make the process standardized and bot friendly before we go ahead and do this automation. So let's say in our case, the process is not it's very straightforward and doesn't require much from much standardization. It's a medium complex. So once you input all these parameters, right, you get your effort estimations here. As you can see, these are your development efforts, and these are your standardization efforts, which is in range. It's like it could take you around 1 week to 2 weeks of development time, standardization efforts to standardize this process first, and then develop it. And then this is the development efforts that will be needed to automate this particular process. So on basis of this complexity, we arrive to this estimations, and these estimations are nothing but this is the time that we give to our development team, that this is on this in this particular time frame, we have to develop this particular process, let's say the procure to pay process, which we have considered in this case, this is gonna take this much of time, let's say 3 weeks of development time, right? So this is basically the 3 weeks of development time which we consider in an ideal scenario. But then we also capture some buffer or contingency to this, adding 10% buffer to this timeline, because everything doesn't run as expected, right? We will have some obstacles or hindrance, when we go ahead and actually go start with the development, right? So it is a best practice, to have 10 weeks of buffer time, to all the processes that we give estimations for. And then we also consider 1 to 2 weeks of hypercare time. Hypercare is nothing in which we basically give support to this process once it is live. That's the hypercare period where we need to be very observant, and we need to be very observe the process quite in detail, just to check whether everything is working as expected or not. Because that's the time when you identify if there are any bugs in the process, or if there are different scenarios which are coming up, which were not planned or which were not expected to be coming up. And that's the hypercare time which we consider. And then also the process documentation time for the PDD, SDD, that also varies basis the complexity. It can vary from 1 to 3 weeks basis how complex the process is. And we usually have 1 to 3 weeks of documentation time kept, let's say for process PDD and SDD, process definition document and solution design documents. We usually have that time also kept to make sure that we have the right documents captured for our processes. So these estimates we also create when we submit that proposals, which I was talking about, to our clients. And we, before we go ahead and submit the proposal, we make sure that we are giving the right estimates to the client. Because it should not happen that let's say the development team thinks that it should take 6 weeks to develop this particular process, but then the pre-sales team find that this is a very medium process, and it could be automated just in 2 weeks. So usually this is the gap and the misunderstanding which that different teams have. So that is why it is good to use a standardized framework like this, which gives everyone a good transparency. This is the time that it will take to automate this process, and these are the number of weeks that we should have in as a contingency, or as a buffer time. And also we do consider the different different like which I mentioned, like the go live, and the process documentation, and the buffer time. So all those things also need to be part of our consideration before we go ahead and give those estimations to our clients. So one aspect to this is we give these estimations at the time of when we go ahead and submit these proposals. Another is when we do these requirement gathering with this client, because that's the time when we go ahead and we know the process in deep dive, right? We know the nitty gritty of the process, we know the process in detail, and we know how complex the process is, how much different things are involved in the process, how many different applications are involved, and how many different business logics are involved. So basis that we determine, and we also give the final estimations to the client. So once this is done, a work breakdown structure is created, and that work breakdown structure determines the everyday task that the team will be doing, from documentation till the go live. That work breakdown structure will have each and everything in detail, right? The different parameters, the different the things, setting up the framework, like in case of UiPath, it's ideal to set up that RE framework before we go ahead and develop, and then actually developing the logic for the process. So that will have the WBS, that is the work breakdown structure, will have the breakdown of all this. Let's say it's a 3 weeks work, right? So that will have detailed information about how much work needs to be done, and the everyday work that needs to be given to the development team. So that's on the complexity, and basis complexity, we determine the efforts for our development and standardization. You can keep I'll just take a pause again for a few seconds. You can post in your questions if you have any. If you want to know more about any of these different parameters or anything in detail, you can just ping in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer those. The Mentimeter questions, right, displayed by Nikhilesh, and then the last 5 minutes I'll take up for the Q&A, because I could see a lot of messages coming up in the chat. So till the time Nikhilesh pulls up the quiz, I'll read some of the questions that you guys have, and in the last 4-5 minutes that we have, I'll try to answer those questions.
Sure, Kunal. Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful session, and thank you so much for the wonderful audience as well. Let me quickly share my. So the first question, are you guys? I guess you guys are ready. So the first question is, identify the input parameters for process complexity calculator. Okay. Identify the input parameters for process complexity calculator. You have like 3 options. You need to get the right option. Okay. So I increased the time also. Last time it is just 15 seconds, but this time I increased you for 25 seconds. Okay. Time's up. The correct answer is manual hours and process steps. Absolutely correct. Thank you. So 56 people are being correct. We will see the next question. Okay, the question number 2. Be ready. What does technology landscape represents? What does technology landscape represent? There are 4 options. What are the technology landscape represents? What does technology landscape represents? Let's see. We have 10 more seconds left. Last 3 seconds. Time's up. Okay. The answer is number of applications involved in the process. So super. I think we are done. So let's see the results. You guys excited? Then let's see. So we have Harshil Shah and we have Ifham. So Harshil Shah and Ifham, can you please, hearty congratulations. Can you please drop me an email? Okay. Okay. So can you please drop me an email to my email ID so that I can receive you the gift. So before you, before closing you the note, please do RSVP for tomorrow's session. So it's been very interesting tomorrow as well. Okay. If you are, I'm not get, I need to get the details, brother, from Harshil Shah and the other person. Okay. So I hope everybody enjoyed the session, and please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Then only you will get the recordings. So, so last minutes, the last minutes from Kunal, if you want to add something. you can add, and we will
Yeah.
close the session.
Sure, Niklesh. So I've been, just trying to, check the different questions that people have. So few of them are, asking for this template, Niklesh, for
Yeah, I
this,
will. We will try to
yeah,
share the template
for
also.
the complexity calculator and also for the WBS and RFP template.
Okay,
So,
sure. We'll try to do that. We'll try
yeah,
to
we'll
do that.
try to share for the RFP and the WBS, the work breakdown structure also.
Hmm.
And some of them, they are asking for the formulas. So, there are already pre-built formulas into this, which helps us determine how much is the number of weeks that are required to automate that particular process. And some of them are asking on the standardization and hypercare time will also vary based on complexity. So that's right, there was a last option of the efforts to standardize the process. So yeah, that once you select the standardization complexity, that will give you the time frame in range, that this is the time that will be required for standardization. And the hypercare time is also basically decided based on the complexity of the process. And someone is asking, by standardization, do we mean process reengineering? So yeah, that's correct. By standardization, we mean process reengineering itself, that, we have to standardize or, re-engineer certain things before we go ahead and automate it. And somebody asked about the manual hours. So yeah, that's something which we definitely have to ask the business SMEs, that this is the time that will be required, or which they take to work on their particular process. So it's basically from their input that we decide those manual hours. And I think this is where from the majority of the similar questions that I could see. And a lot of people has uh, send me great session, very nice session done today, great presentation. So thanks everyone for that, for appreciating that. Really encourages me and all the other speaker fellows that we have. So thanks a lot for appreciating. And you can, if you guys have any further questions, or some questions that I have missed, because there are too many questions out here. So you guys can drop in your questions to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to assist and respond to you guys. So yeah, I think I'm good for today. You guys can reach out to me anytime if you have any other additional questions, and Niklesh will be sharing those templates with you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Thank you so much. I am repeating the today winner is Harsh Sahil, and if I'm right, I think they are there. Okay. So I will. I mean, if you guys there, then please drop me an email with your details. Okay. So before leaving, please do subscribe to our channel and please do register for tomorrow event as well. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Cheers. Thank you. Nice talking to you. And thank you, Kunal, for the wonderful session. Awesome audience and awesome session. So thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks, Niklesh. Thanks, everyone. Bye
Good day.
bye. Good
Bye bye.
night. Bye.